Acciones dinos alitos, Macaris insetin Theotokon, Tinai Macariston que panamomiton, que mitera tu Theuimon, Tintimio teranton cheruvim, que endoxoteran asinkritos ton seraphim, Tina diaptoros theon logon tekusan, Tinondos Theotokon, semegalino.
Don't know if you can see this tarelka, this plate very well, although I've zoomed in on it. It's made in Macedonia, a particular kind of Balkan work, a copper plate with black lacquer, and then the designs are scratched into it. This particular one is the church of a little monastery of Sveti Naum, or St. Naum. This is where the work of translating the New Testament, perhaps the whole Bible, I don't recall, into Slavonic language was completed. St. Naum was a disciple of St. Clement of Ohrid, disciple of St. Kirill and Methodi, who actually created the written form of the Slavic language and began the translation of the Gospels in the New Testament. Sveti Naum Monastery is just south of Ohrid. On the shores of Lake Ohrid, quite near the Albanian border. And St. Clement was in Ohrid itself. Sveti Naum built his monastery and here worked on the translations. We were there about 35 to 40 years, I think maybe around 40 years ago now. The moschee, or the relics of Sveti Naum, are there, and it was quite an experience to visit it. But I think this kind of copper work is particularly interesting. So just wanted to kind of share that with you and show it to you. Well, again, will depend on the acoustics for the broadcast this evening, because so far I haven't got a functioning microphone to plug into the computer. This broadcast is not all things considered. So we'll be going through the newspaper and considering all things, at least things that we find here. Among my more favorite subjects to talk about is the positive aspect of our younger generation. As many of you who view regularly know, I have a great deal of faith in the younger generation, and I sincerely believe that they're better than my generation. And I dare say better than the boomer generation, which came just after mine. I'm a bit of a World War II generation, and the boomers came afterwards when the soldiers, a few soldiers and sailors and airmen who remained alive came back and started reproducing. The Generation X, a little bit different. I wouldn't comment on it, but the Millennium generation in particular really very much impresses me. And here are some young students from the University of Toronto. They're all studying in the faculty of medicine or healthcare, nurses or public health, one or the other. You see, this whole group of young people have set up a healthcare outreach to the most vulnerable people. Now, these are people who would not normally find their way into the healthcare system, although, of course, it's free. I mean, they wouldn't have to pay, but still, a lot of people don't find their way into it. And this would be people on the street who have psychiatric issues, alcohol or drug issues. Very often they don't they're really not capable of participating fully in the healthcare system. So these young people have gone out, and the city's most vulnerable people set up clinics to reach them, since they often don't reach the healthcare system. Another thing is that there are many patients, people who live on the street, and we've had them show up at the monastery as well with psychiatric problems or drug problems. They actually don't have their provincial medical cards or any other form of identification. So it's rather difficult for them to get into the healthcare system, because somehow, there's a necessity of drawing some limits and having proper identification to prove that you're a Canadian, and a healthcare registration card is one of the necessities. And so we've got registered nurses, medical students, and students in healthcare professions of other kinds who have joined in to reach out into this community and provide healthcare outreach to them. That's one of the interesting things that I found. The other one is next generation of leaders in philanthropy. We have so many young people who have become deeply involved. Ariane Sauvé and a group of friends have tried to create a mental health care fund. And they've raised so far $1.5 million for youth mental health care. The young people very often don't get into the system. I know we had a young man in school, very intelligent, and the teachers and the principal always sort of looked down on him for behavioral problems. Of course, it just didn't occur to them that the young man was bipolar and had healthcare problems. In those days, there were fewer treatments. Nevertheless, a person can do very well if they have the proper treatment, proper medication, a bipolar person. Darren Richardson was the best friend of Miss Sauvé, and at the age of 14 he committed suicide. So Ariane Sauvé was motivated to get into this field of youth mental health problems and raise money for youth mental health care projects of different kinds. That was really a great thing, and she'll leave behind, she and her friends will leave behind a great legacy. Another group of young students, high school students, have begun a program about fighting malaria, mostly in third world countries, of course. But gone on a tour of some of these third world countries, recognized what the problem is, and really gotten deeply involved in, and these are still high school students, in raising money, doing, supporting research and doing other things that might be possible to help people in the area of malaria research and palliative care and all these things. In Cambridge, Ontario, teenagers have gotten deeply involved in fundraising and philanthropy. Firana Sayandala, 18 years old, volunteered with the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank for more than 4 years already. So she would have started when she was 14. Helping the charity provide emergency and proactive services that help people recover from and avoid crises. She's been involved in fundraising events, often in a leadership role, has assumed an activist role promoting the charity and recruiting others. Through Firana's efforts to support the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, it allows the charity to help more people in need when they need it most. Very proactive. When there's going to be a crisis, hurricane or some other storm, they're already preparing to respond to it before it actually strikes some area. and they're living proof of the power of grassroots philanthropy. Takes a lot of the pressure off of the social welfare system, and the other young people are also taking some pressure off the healthcare regions, who very, very much overworked in the emergency wards and other things, but also by getting citizens involved in things like proactive food banks and other charitable enterprises. Does take a great deal of stress off the provincial budgets, city budgets as well. The outstanding youth philanthropist of the year is 17-year-old Jocelyn Davis. Her accomplishments have earned her a great reputation as a champion in youth leadership and energetic philanthropist. As a 9-year-old, Miss Davis co-founded the Eighth Rung, a youth group dedicated to international causes. She introduced a unique funding model whereby the Eighth Rung challenges other youth with bold matching fund campaigns for clean water in Asia and solar lighting for first aid stations in Papua New Guinea, where electricity is hard to come by. Jocelyn's been volunteering in the Calgary Food Bank for 5 years. Now she's 17. That means since 12 years old she's been involved in the food bank. Since she was 9 years old when she founded this charity, this outreach to third world countries. Now these are really amazing things, and they give me enormous hope about the younger generation. There's another issue that I've been following for some time, and this is how meat-laden diets harm the planet and ourselves. I think most of you are aware that red meat, particularly when a great deal of it is eaten every week, can contribute to cancers of various types, particularly bowel cancer and colon cancer. Also, many of you will be aware that the production of beef, you consume, I can't remember the quantity, but you have to consume something like 50 times more energy and food to produce a pound of meat. So it's an enormous investment to produce a single pound of meat. But also, we find out that people are eating far too much of that and far too much dairy products. And that the meat contributing to cancer and therefore a drain on the healthcare system, but also harming the planet on which we live. It just shows us once more the wisdom and understanding and knowledge of the Orthodox Church, which has given us 2 fasting days every week in which we fast from meat and dairy products, and other fasting periods during the year in which we have longer periods of time, 40 days for Great Lent plus Holy Week, and other the 4 major fast periods of the year. We would fast primarily from meat and dairy products. Obviously, the Orthodox Church has wisdom and knowledge and understanding in giving us these fasts because it really does cut back on damage to the planet on which we live, but also is very beneficial for the health of Orthodox Christians who actually keep the fast. It cuts back on their percentage of possibility of them developing these particular cancers, cuts back on fat consumption, and other issues. So the Orthodox Church knows very well what she's doing, and we know that the fast periods benefit us spiritually. They also have an enormous health benefit to us. And it's ironic that some people argue, well, I can't keep the fast because it's bad for my health or might damage my health, when precisely the opposite is true. Fasting, according to the Orthodox Christian rule, is extremely beneficial to your personal health and to the health of the planet on which we live. Something to bear in mind. The other issues that come up from time to time. Here we have two volcanoes rumbling into life. Both of these are in the Alaskan Peninsula. Now they're live volcanoes which have erupted at other times. And we know that they contribute to catastrophes around the world. And we also know that they can hasten the change in climate. Major volcanic eruptions can speed up global warming, global climate change in unpredictable ways. And in fact, they can even reverse global warming into global cooling, both of which are extremely dangerous for human life, for the life of other creatures on the planet. But ordinary volcanic eruptions contribute to global warming by adding more carbon to the earth, to the atmosphere. But I wonder how many of you are aware that great volcanic eruption in Iceland in the 1700s, and I think I mentioned this before, released sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, and this precipitated out in rainfall as sulfuric acid, and caused a huge number of deaths in Britain and Europe at the time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was Katla, the volcano Katla in Iceland, which is, in its eruptions, produces an unusually large amount of sulfurs. It's also a very active volcano, and it's acting up again. Life is tenuous in this world. Life can be very short. Well, we'll say that life is short, especially when we get older, but life can be even much shorter. It's much shorter when these catastrophes happen. It reminds us, first of all, that life was given to us for living, that we should live life to the fullest, and also think about the end of life and the fact that we will face a judgment, and there will be a difference between heaven and hell. For those who are people who are believers, this is quite significant. We should not think that, well, I'm a young person, I have a lot of time. You have no idea how much time you have. So one should always be prepared. We should also be prepared to respond to such catastrophes if we're not affected quite so much by them, to be prepared to help those who are. So just something to think about. The shortness of life doesn't depend on our age, but on so many circumstances in the world around us. So I want to touch on a few of these all things considered issues. Humanity being outsourced? Well, we have ended up in some industries already, and we will end up with supervisors in plants and even in offices who are really basically super intelligent computer-driven machines. Well, we think of superintelligence and even of Kurzweil's singularity as being somewhat like science fiction. But it isn't really. It's not science fiction at all. These things are coming to pass around us. Machines have been given the task already. The core care for the elderly. There are robots that help people who are quadriplegic, who are rendered quadriplegic by, say, ALS or multiple sclerosis. But we have to realize that many of the things that we humans do are being outsourced to machines, to robotic machines, and that very soon we're going to have computers that can outthink and are more intelligent than humans. It's true that we program these computers, but we can program a great deal more into them than we can program into our own brains. So in about 10, 15 years, we're going to see far more development of the robotics that are going to replace some things that human beings do. We can memorize facts, But computers will also end up being in a position where they can memorize facts more efficiently than we can. It's much more efficient to have facts programmed into you anyway than it is to study and read and take notes and go through school and try to assimilate a lot of these facts. The other thing is that humans are being given a fact deficit in their education. Because we can look up facts that we need so easily on Google or some other search engine, we don't even have to open a book in order to find some information. Of course, the information is a bit incomplete, and sometimes it's just dead wrong. But in any case, we don't retain, memorize, and develop our understanding of facts nearly so much as we did in former times. Computers take up the slack by doing just that. Computer diagnostic robots that can diagnose various types of cancer faster, more completely, more effectively than humans can take much more into consideration than the human mind is able to. And consequently, we're going to see improvements in cancer treatment because of computer diagnostic. And you'll be amazed at what these computers will do and how lifelike they are. So don't take the idea of superintelligence among some humans and superintelligent computers that outstrip human intelligence when we reach that critical point that Kurzweil refers to as the singularity. And I also think one should take more into consideration if you're studying, looking at life itself. Panoff's curve. I think we talked a little bit about it, we won't go into it here. But one of the great difficulties, I think, with leadership in the church and with many people in the church, we do not need to be Protestant fundamentalists in the Orthodox Church. We have to accommodate our thinking and our minds to newer developments in time and space. We do it with more caution than civil or secular society does, for good reason. We look at different issues than secular and civil society does. At the same time, we cannot place ourselves in a position of being so totally obsolete that it doesn't matter what considerations we give. We don't speak to any generation that exists or lives. And so we've got to think a little bit more outside the box. We have fundamentalists within the Orthodox Church, and the ultra-conservative elements in the church, which actually set us back and which actually are a spiritual deficit in the church, and a theological deficit, I dare say. I think there's enough evidence from some very profound university studies to find out that if we did a functional MRI on the brain, we would find problems in the amygdala region of the brain. That's the fear region. It would be hyperactive, oversized, or something like this. We mustn't let these ultra-conservative people hold us back. Because one of the problems is that the more fundamentalist, more ultra-conservative, ultra-right-wing people in the church tie the church so closely in bondage to politics, to secular civil politics, that it actually cripples the ministry of the church in so many ways and prevents us from responding in a meaningful, saving way to generations whose minds are shaped by a kind of evolutionary process driven by modern technology and science. Now, the thing with modern science is, okay, if it disagrees with something that we hold as a model of reality, the ultra-right-wing response is to curse the reality itself, to curse the science for upsetting its ideology. The rational, reasonable, more moderate, and more deeply believing response is to re-examine our model of reality to see if perhaps it's wrong and needs to be changed. If it's inappropriate, it needs to be reshaped somewhat. That's the sort of normal, rational, reasonable, moderate, Orthodox Christian response. We need to see more of that in the church. And less of people trying to bully the church into being in bondage to secular politics. Because that also secularizes the church itself. And if you trust politics and politicians, I'll sell you a building lot on Mars. Reasonable, very cheap, very cheaply. If you can believe politicians and politics, if you can believe they're going to reshape morality, if you can believe they're even going to be moral, if you believe that they're going to make Canada or America into more religious Christian nations, I'll sell you a building lot on Mars, cheap. Think about these things a little bit. This is all things considered. Send us your questions, things you would like to have us consider on All Things Considered. And I'm going to add one other thing. Sometimes I come across people who are almost forced to leave the Orthodox Church because they're engaged to a spouse who does not convert to Orthodoxy, at least not at the time. We have some Orthodox Christian priests who will refuse to marry these people in the church. And if they have a secular marriage, perhaps even refuse to give communion to the one who is Orthodox. I actually think that's evil. I think it's just mean-minded and hateful. The very reason we had the common cup instead of people taking communion together in the crowning of a marriage was to accommodate those situations in which one of the couple were not Orthodox. Now, Apostle Paul doesn't want even a Christian person to sever their relationship with an unbelieving spouse, because spouses can be sanctified by the believing spouse. And if we receive people with hospitality, serve the wedding, serve the crowning of the marriage. The marriage takes place in their hearts anyway. And in the first several centuries, all marriages were common law to begin with. In the West, certainly marriage was not a formal sacrament until the 12th century. And it was hotly debated at that time whether it should be or not, since it had always been common law. So think about these things a little bit, and sometimes rigidity, brittleness, and sheer fanaticism are simply not valid ways to proclaim the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ and the gospel to the world around us. You have a greater hope of converting the non-Orthodox spouse through hospitality and kindness and generosity than you do through this fragile, brittle fanaticism. Just a thought in passing. This is All Things Considered from the Canadian Orthodox Broadcasting System. Thank you, and God bless you, and please join us again.